I'm Cynthia Rowland, and this is episode 139 of EO Radio Show. This is the 25th in a series of quick tip episodes focusing on the details of state registration of nonprofit corporations. In previous episodes, we talked about filing in Delaware and California, which are the most frequently used by our clients, most of whom have a connection with California. With the help of Joe Hilliard, today we look at the basic state filing requirements for nonprofit corporations operating in Montana and Nebraska. After today's episode, the only remaining states are Kansas and Missouri. You can find all the prior episodes on our website or at the Farella YouTube channel, where there is a playlist just for state filing requirements. Welcome to the EO Radio Show, your nonprofit legal resource. Brought to you by the Exempt Organizations Group at Farella, Braun & Martel. My name is Cynthia Rowland, and I'm a partner at Farella. I'm a business and tax lawyer with more than 30 years of experience advising clients on nonprofit and charity law. Through this podcast, our lawyers and guests will discuss a range of legal and business issues impacting the nonprofit world because we understand you work hard every day to make your community a better place to live and do business. Many of our programs focus on the basics, and at times we'll do a deep dive into narrow and complicated legal issues. Again, welcome to the EO Radio Show. We're glad you're here. As we discussed in previous episodes, nonprofit corporations are one variety of fictitious business entities. Others include partnerships and limited liability companies. The laws of all the states prescribe certain formalities that organizers of these business entities must go through so that the entity can be regulated and subject to legal process as a person. Since business enterprises aren't natural persons, the laws have developed mechanisms for treating them like natural persons. This is where the state filings come into play. In order for the organizers of these fictitious entities to take advantage of the protection of the laws, they have to provide notice as to the legal name, the state whose jurisdiction they are claiming for corporate organization laws, a physical address where they can be served with legal process, and certain other information. In this episode, we aren't going to dive deep into the pros and cons for where to incorporate, but instead we're focusing on the ease of formation, standardized documents that are available, filing fees, and similar matters. As with all the states we've discussed, if you do business as a nonprofit in Montana or Nebraska, or solicit charitable contributions there, even if just through the nonprofit corporation's website, the nonprofit may need to have a legal presence and be registered in these two states. For the details of these states, we welcome back Joe Hilliard. Joe is a senior paralegal at Farella. He specializes in formation and compliance matters for all manner of entities, and in particular charities that are tax exempt under Internal Revenue Code Section 501c3. Prior to working at Farella, he worked in-house for several real estate development and management companies in Southern California, working on real estate purchases and vendor contracting. Welcome back to the show, Joe. It's good to see you again.
It's good to see you as well.
So as we've been doing, let's start with updates on the laws before we get into the nitty-gritty for Montana and Nebraska.
For sure. So there's nothing really new on the state front in the last month, but on the federal level, and this is no surprise to anyone listening to us, we're in the midst of the shutdown still here. It's October 13th when we're recording. So they've been shut down for 2 weeks, and the IRS specifically started getting layoffs in the middle of last week, October 6th. So they sent around noting that significantly slower responses on all documentation to the IRS. On the one side for EINs, they're saying that you should really just go through the automated system and not try to use the fax, which is what is best practice anyways, just because it's easy, it's instantaneous. But if there are issues, I think the biggest issue in this is to be concerned with if you're using someone that's a responsible party that's already a responsible party in the past for several other foundations or even their own LLCs, it will get dinged by the system that the person is too responsible and you will have to fax it in. And the normal 4-day response to the fax is off the board for an EIN. So be mindful of that. If you don't get one on the online system, you may be in for a wait. And still, we've talked about this before, just with the slowdown of less employees over this year of 2025 for the IRS, that the 1023 applications are still running slower. Right now, it says on their website as of Friday, October 10th, it said anything submitted after January 6th has not been assigned to anyone. You don't even ETA to call, where it used to be like the 6 months, 180 days. Earlier in this year, obviously, we saw a couple where we filed them here ourselves that we got about a 4-month turnaround. But again, the IRS, they're really hedging their bets and hedging them even more by saying, hey, look, we don't know when we'll get you anything. So be mindful of that when you're getting EINs for a new foundation. And then the next step after your formation, how fast your 1023 will go.
Yeah. Expect major delays, as they say.
Yes, I think that's correct.
Hopefully that will all get sorted out in the near future and we'll get things back on track at the IRS. But for now, it's going to be slow going. But the states are all operating on their usual course. Let's start with talking about Montana and what it takes to create a new nonprofit corporation in the state of Montana.
For sure. So in Montana, they have their Secretary of State that governs entity formations. Their web portal uses the same interface portal that we've talked about with California and then not too long ago with North Dakota and Iowa. So especially here in the West, we see a similarity of using the systems, which is nice. If you're going up and down the coast, you kind of have the same idea of what you're looking at. And so if you're familiar with any of those states, you won't be surprised to see it or to realize that you need to set up an account to even navigate the forms. Again, it's simple. They don't ask you for anything other than a name and an email. We talked about one a couple of weeks ago where you had to have like more information, but this one is just that. Unlike California, these are not available online as fillable and printable PDFs. You just have to do them online.
It's a web form.
Yes, a web form. For the domestic nonprofit corporations, they do have a form, Articles of Incorporation for domestic nonprofit corporations. And then they have a separate actual form for domestic religious corporation sole. This is interesting. Here in California, you and I, Cynthia, have had one of these that we've been dealing with. So it's kind of interesting to actually see where they have here in this state. Obviously, it's a bigger issue in Montana because they haven't actually separated out how to do it differently.
Yeah. So a corp sole is a very unique kind of organization only used by certain religions. But it's interesting to note that Montana does have a separate form for that.
Yeah. So on the Montana form, it has the normal items we see, your name, the registered agent, whether it's perpetual or if it's termed, the name and address of the incorporator. You do need to select what type of nonprofit, whether it's public benefit and then with or without members, mutual benefit with or without members, and religious. And they also have a congressional chartered one with or without members. So they have a couple of different choices. It does have a purpose fill-in section in their form, which is unlike what we see in California. So you can actually use the form. And it has a section for the postal address and the physical address. There's a box where you mark if you're applying for a 501c3 status. And if so, then an attachment with the required language is asked then to be attached. And the website in their Business Help Center fact actually has a PDF with the IRS language to include. So you can actually, if you really want to double check it, make sure you don't want to put anything else, but you can just download the PDF from one side of the website and then upload it right into your application and you're set with the language, which is very nice. Handy. Makes it very easy. Then minimum of one incorporator must be named, and then the directors and officers with a business address must be named. If this here for a domestic nonprofit, you have to have 3 directors. We know this varies state from state. We don't always talk about that. But here in Montana, very explicitly in the form, it says you have to have the 3 directors. And it cites the Montana code section.
All right. So that's straightforward enough. Actually, more straightforward than many that we've talked about. So let's turn our attention now to the foreign registrations. What do we do if we're trying to register a Delaware or California or other state in Montana to do business there?
For sure. So they have a form certificate of authority for foreign nonprofit corporation. Here too, they also have a separate form for the religious corporation sole. Asks for what we see in our basics of all the foreign registrations. We talk about the name, where they were formed, the date of formation in their home state, their address, a Montana registered agent. It does ask if the corporation has perpetual existence in its home state or not. Their Section 7 on it is a checkbox for members or none. It doesn't, unlike the other one where it has you delineate what type you are here, it just asks if you have members or not. Asks for all the current officers and directors and their business addresses. And then there's a checkbox here to confirm if the home state does not require 3 directors. So you need to go back to that. And unlike most of the states we talk about, no good standing is required from your home state here. So
you don't have to prove or even check that you're in good standing. Well, that's handy, but it's a good point at which to.
Kind of interesting, yes.
Let's talk a little bit about cost and the response time in Montana.
So the filing fee is $20 for both the foreign and the domestic. So that's very reasonable. And as of October 3rd, the Montana website was processing through October 1st. So you've got 2 to 3 business days for your filings. And then when you file through, it gives you options, a standard processing, which was the $20 we just talked about, up to 7 business days, which could be up to 7 days business processing on there. But like we said, right now they're running a little faster. 24-hour processing would be $40, and then processed within 1 business day, that would be, and then 1 hour processing is $120. So that's still very reasonable, certainly when we talk about these.
Much lower cost than many of the states, and reasonably quick anyway.
Yes.
So let's turn to annual filings. When are they due, and are there annual fees with that?
Sure. So in Montana, irrespective of when you're formed, your annual reports are due by basically tax day, April 15th. And it's obviously that would not be your usual date for a nonprofit, but they have that as the date no matter what. And it's $20 for nonprofits, domestic and foreign. And then if you miss the April 15th, it will cost you $35. So still not too bad.
Yeah. So let's talk about transparency. How much of this, how much information about the individuals goes into the public record?
For sure. So as we noted, even on the initial formations and registrations, all the officers and directors must be named, and that continues for each annual report. You will have your top level officers, your president, your secretary, and your treasurer. This doesn't include vice presidents on this one as a mandatory, and then all of your directors would be named.
All of the directors, and that's with business addresses, not...
Correct. That is business addresses, not home addresses. I think we've seen this when we looked at these. The East Coast ones have much more of a drive towards like home addresses, whereas here on the West Coast, we've seen much more of just a business address is fine. I would say from looking at those, that would be the top level of what we've seen to think about.
Yeah, interesting how that's breaking down. So are there other state agencies in Montana? How does it supervise the charities?
So actually, charitable organizations do not have a further registration requirement with either like their Secretary of State or with the Department of Justice, their AG, which is unusual. The Department of Justice does have a consumer protection fact that we've marked down here that regards contributions and forms for complaints. So you don't have to, but if there's something wrong, people can find you and complain. And then if you own property, if the nonprofit owns property, it can file for a property tax exemption in Montana with their Department of Revenue. And further, if they'll have employees, it needs to register for Montana withholding taxes and again with the Montana Department of Revenue. Link to the fact for the DOR and all the other Montana websites are here in the show notes. The Montana Nonprofit Association actually has an excellent timeline and document filing resource specific for Montana formed nonprofits. So check that page out as well for the people that are really interested.
Okay, great. So Montana is pretty straightforward. Let's look at Nebraska. And I don't know how we ended up lumping Nebraska and Montana together, I think, as we start knocking off other states.
We hopscotched a little, and suddenly those were like the only two sort of northwestern ones left, kind of not close together, but...
Yes, not that geography matters all this much, but we did try to be a little bit thoughtful. But anyway, welcome to the club, Nebraska. Tell us about what's needed to file in the state of Nebraska.
For sure. So here too, their Secretary of State in Nebraska governs the formations. And for domestic entities, they have an online Articles of Incorporation, domestic nonprofit corporation. And then you're allowed to upload the articles. It has the basics, the name, the registered agent, whether you have members or not, if it will be a public benefit, mutual benefit, or religious nonprofit, name and street address for each incorporator. And then, quote, provisions not inconsistent with law regarding the distribution of assets on dissolution, unquote. They have that. So that section is where your 501c3 dissolution language would be entered. Nebraska doesn't require a nonprofit to describe its purpose in its articles of incorporation, but obviously if you intend to apply for a 501c3 status, include that detailed statement using the specific language from the IRS. It also does not require, but may include the names and street addresses of the individuals who are to serve as the initial directors. So there you go. And then each incorporator, and then if you name the directors in the articles, must sign those articles. So that doesn't necessarily put yourself in a place of wanting to do it necessarily, because again, could be a timing issue of getting everyone to sign if you have multiple directors or they're not the incorporator. So it's something to think about that you may, but you don't have to. And I think arguably I would say for ease of process that you probably would not want to here, then use the may.
You try to do it just with the incorporator to get things launched.
Yes.
So the foreign nonprofit.
So for a foreign nonprofit, yes, they have an application for certificate of authority to transact business for a nonprofit corporation. This too can be filed. It can be printed out in PDF filed or submitted electronically either way. So it's actually pretty easy either way on their website. And the fillable form is really straightforward. It has name, home state, street, address here, the domestic principal office, a mailing address, your registered agent there in Nebraska, and whether it has members, and again, what type of nonprofit it is. Names and business addresses of all the directors and officers must be included here. And then a current home state certificate of status within 60 days of the filing must be attached. And then additionally, when I talk about this is something unusual. Nebraska has a proof of publication filing for all corporations. Corporations and LLCs must run their publication notices in a newspaper for 3 consecutive weeks, and you must publish business information in the newspaper after any different business events, including the formation, any amendments to the certificate, a merger, a conversion, and even your dissolution. So this is not a one-time when you formed it, but anytime you do anything substantive like an amendment, like a dissolution, you will need to put this in Nebraska newspapers. Once that's done, you provide a proof of publication by filing an affidavit with the Secretary of State. And the affidavit provides the time when the paper ran the publication notice, the paper in which you ran the publication notice, and the status of that newspaper as a legal newspaper. So there's several, this is a secondary step to it. And the biggest reminder here is obviously be aware of local rules. It wasn't even obvious from their website that I needed to do this. It was only as I went through the forms and I saw this and I pulled back and looked at it a bigger picture and did further research that I saw that this was a mandatory here. So again, be aware of what goes on.
Yeah, that's really unusual. I haven't seen anything like this in a long time. I recall them for fictitious business names in California, but this is at the corporate level.
Not for your actual formations. No, yeah. It's kind of unusual.
This is really unusual. Well, okay. So once you get past that, let's talk a little bit about timing and cost for filing in Nebraska.
The Nebraska website notes that filings will be reviewed and action taken within 1 to 2 business days of an electronic submission. The documents themselves are time and date stamped at the time the filings are accepted by the filing office. So you've got a little electric thing, which is what we see here in California too. It's kind of like burned into it. So
yeah, great.
Then if it needs to be expedited, there are fact notes to contact the Secretary of State at their phone number to request expedited processing of a filing that's been submitted electronically. Note too, there's a transaction history link on the service homepage to view the status so you can get a real-time update of what you're doing. And then there in Nebraska, the filing fee for both the domestic and the foreign is $30 in office and $25 online. So it's not too bad. And then the publication fee, once you've got that affidavit done, is the same again, $30 if you do it over the counter in the office or $25 online. So basically $50 to get yourself done completely. And again, you have to do it for 3 weeks. Essentially, you've got that publication about a month afterwards.
Well, in that publication, there's going to be a fee from the newspaper as well.
Yes, that's true too.
So it gets a little nickel and dimed to death there. Well, annual filings and annual reports. Anything interesting there?
For Nebraska, domestic and foreign nonprofit corporations have biennial reports that are due the odd-numbered years by April 1st and then delinquent by June 16th. So if we form now, it's October 2025. Our first report would be due then April 1st, 2027.
Interesting.
And then annual reports must include all officer and director information. These are $25 plus here they charge you a $3 portal fee to use their online and then optional 45 cents per page for proof of a filing copy. So it gets there.
All right. So transparency and privacy issues in Nebraska.
So as we know, when you first form in Nebraska as a domestic, you may note your directors. And then the initial foreign filings needs to name the directors and an address for them. And then when you get to the annual reports, it will be officers and directors both. You don't have to name officers in either of those initial filings. But again, that could be 2 years down the line now.
Yeah, it could be. So, it could be quite a long time with that.
Yes, eventually you will need to have all your officers and directors named.
So state agencies, does Nebraska have much of an oversight mechanism?
No, here too, the charitable solicitation registration is not required on the state level. So there's no need for public charities to register with the state prior to any fundraising. And then further, Nebraska nonprofits don't require statewide business licenses either. You may need to obtain more specialized permits, though, depending on, activities you're planning on holding. So they do check with the local rules. The Nebraska Department of Revenue provides helpful licensing information. All you need to do is check with your city and county licensing divisions to determine whether you need to secure permits or licenses. So that's mostly for in-person things, but think about that. Mm-hmm. Link to that agency and all the relevant documents and departments are in the show notes. And here, the Nebraska Chamber of Commerce website actually has a great overview of what the state's nonprofits requirements are. So again, Great. That's linked too. So you've got a state level, again, Chamber of Commerce that's looking at this and saying, hey, this is how the best practices to run here in the state.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. I think most of the states have either had a state agency with some guidance for nonprofits, or a few of the states have state nonprofits themselves that do this kind of collective information educational service for the nonprofits in their state. So that's really nice to know. Well, thank you, Joe. I appreciated your help on all. I guess we've finished 48 states in the District of Columbia now, and we've got one more episode to do, and then we'll move on to some additional interesting topics for nonprofits.
Yeah, it'll be fun.
So that's all for this episode. Be sure to check out the show notes for links to resources in Montana and Nebraska and the links to the earlier episodes on the states we already covered. Also, as a reminder, if you go back to earlier episodes for states we covered in the past, be sure to check into updated laws before looking at filing or even doing your annual report in any of the states. As I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, Farella, Braun, and Martell has a YouTube channel, and there are several nonprofit playlists, including the one we're building, where all the state filing episodes are in one place. So look for that link in the show notes as well. I'm Cynthia Rowland, and you've been listening to EO Radio Show, your nonprofit legal resource, brought to you by the Exempt Organizations Group at Farella, Braun, and Martell. If you have suggestions for topics you would like for us to discuss, please email us at eoradioshow@fbm.com. That's eoradioshow@fbm.com. Thank you for joining us. Until next time, make a difference.